The following scene contains sensitive images that may be disturbing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. In a land where surface rivers vanish into sand, Persian engineers solved an impossible problem. They carved horizontal wells into mountain aquifers and let gravity carry water for miles beneath the desert. No pumps, no power, just precise angles cut through stone in absolute darkness. Persia should not have existed. The Iranian plateau is one of the harshest landscapes on Earth, a place where summer temperatures soar past 50 degrees Celsius and winter winds cut through mountain passes with killing cold. Rainfall is so scarce in the Central Plains that rivers born in distant mountains evaporate before they ever reach the lowlands, swallowed by sun and sand until nothing remains but cracked earth and salt. Yet here, against every geographical probability, one of history's greatest civilizations took root and flourished for 3,000 years. Today, when satellites pass over Iran, they capture something strange. Across the brown and broken expanse of desert, mysterious dotted lines stretch for miles, sometimes curving gently, sometimes running arrow-straight toward distant horizons. These are not roads. They are not borders or ancient walls. They are the surface markers of something buried beneath, something that made the impossible possible. The Persians called them qanats, a word meaning simply channel, but there was nothing simple about what they represented. Beneath those dotted lines lie tunnels, hand-carved passages stretching from mountain aquifers to desert cities, carrying water through absolute darkness without pumps, without engines, without any power source except the patient pull of gravity. How did ancient engineers accomplish this? How did workers without electricity or modern surveying equipment construct thousands of miles of subterranean channels with such precision that many still function after 3 millennia? This is more than an engineering story. It is a story of survival against impossible odds, of ingenuity that refused to accept the limits nature imposed, of generations who built in darkness so their descendants might live in light. To understand the qanat, we must first understand the land that demanded its creation. The dasht-e-kavir stretches across central Iran like a wound that never heals, a salt desert where summer air shimmers above crusted flats and temperatures climb beyond 50 degrees Celsius. But even this vast emptiness is not the harshest ground Persia claims. To the southeast lies the dasht-e-lut, where satellite measurements have recorded surface temperatures exceeding 70 degrees Celsius, the hottest ground ever measured on Earth, a place where no plant grows and no animal survives. Between these killing deserts and the habitable margins of the plateau, water determines everything. Rain does fall in Persia, but only on the mountains. The Alborz range to the north catches moisture from the Caspian Sea. The Zagros chain to the west intercepts clouds moving inland from the Mediterranean. Yet, almost none of this water reaches the central plains where people needed to live. It evaporates under relentless sun. It sinks into porous rock and vanishes. It gathers into seasonal rivers that surge with spring snowmelt and then die in summer heat, their beds turning to dust long before they reach any settlement. Where mountain slopes meet desert floor, however, something remarkable occurs. Gravel and sand accumulate in broad formations called alluvial fans, and within these fans, groundwater collects in hidden aquifers, trapped beneath the surface, shielded from the killing sun. The water was there. The question was how to reach it. Surface canals failed catastrophically, losing up to 60% of their flow to evaporation before water traveled even a few miles. Wells required endless labor, teams of workers hauling buckets upward day after day, a solution that might sustain a household, but never a city. Sometime around 1000 BCE, perhaps even earlier, someone asked a different question. Instead of bringing water up, what if they brought it sideways, underground, protected from the sun, using nothing but gravity? The answer would reshape the ancient world. The earliest known qanats emerge from the archaeological record in the region of ancient Urartu, a kingdom that flourished in what is now Armenia and northwestern Iran around 800 BCE. Yet fragments of evidence suggest the technology may be older still, its origins lost in the unrecorded experiments of forgotten generations who first dared to dig into darkness seeking water. The principle they discovered was elegant in its simplicity. A qanat begins high on a mountain slope or at the edge of an alluvial fan, where workers sink a vertical shaft until they strike the water table. From this mother well, a gently sloping tunnel extends downward toward the village or fields that need water, sometimes traveling 5 kilometers, sometimes 50, always maintaining a precise gradient that allows gravity alone to pull the water forward. No pumps, no mechanical power, no fuel or labor required once the digging was complete. The key innovation that made such distances possible was the vertical shaft, sunk at regular intervals along the tunnel's entire length. These shafts served as access points during construction, allowing workers to dig toward each other from multiple locations simultaneously. They provided ventilation for the diggers laboring in airless depths, and they created permanent maintenance access that would serve for thousands of years. From above, these shafts create the distinctive signature visible in satellite images. Chains of circular mounds formed from excavated earth stretching across the desert in straight or gently curving lines. The scale defies easy comprehension. A single qanat can run 50 kilometers. The longest known system stretches 120 kilometers through darkness. Iran alone contains an estimated 37,000 qanats, with a combined length exceeding 270,000 kilometers, enough to encircle the Earth nearly 7 times. Behind every kilometer stood specialized workers called muqannis, men who dug in absolute darkness through tunnels barely wide enough to swing a pick, facing cave-ins, toxic gases, and sudden drowning. The qanat was not built by armies or slaves. It was built by masters of an impossible craft. They were born into their craft, and they died in its service, generation after generation passing knowledge from father to son in an unbroken chain that stretched across centuries. The muqannis formed a distinct caste within Persian society, recognized and respected for skills so specialized that no outsider could hope to master them. Their domain was darkness, their workplace a tunnel carved through living earth where the sun never reached and silence pressed against the ears like something solid. The dimensions of that workspace would terrify most people. Qanat tunnels measured roughly 80 centimeters wide and 150 centimeters tall, barely enough room for a man to crouch and swing a pickaxe, impossible to turn around in, difficult to breathe in as stale air accumulated in the depths. Muqannis worked by the feeble glow of oil lamps when they could afford the fuel, by touch and memory when they could not. Death waited in a dozen forms. Cave-ins struck without warning, tons of earth collapsing on workers who never saw the failure coming. Toxic gases pooled in poorly ventilated sections, invisible and odorless, until a man simply stopped breathing and fell. Sudden breaches into pressurized aquifers drowned workers in seconds, filling tunnels faster than anyone could crawl toward safety. Flash floods born from distant mountain storms could transform a dry tunnel into a death trap, water roaring through the darkness while men scrambled desperately upward toward shafts that might be hundreds of meters away. The tools that accomplished all this were almost primitive. Iron picks to break the earth, leather buckets to collect the spoil, wooden windlasses mounted above each shaft to haul debris upward load after load. No machinery reinforced the raw walls. No modern surveying equipment guided the dig. Yet these tunnels required extraordinary precision. A qanat must maintain a gradient steep enough for water to flow but gentle enough to prevent erosion. A calculation so fine that error of even 1 degree could waste years of labor. Muqannas achieved this through methods passed down like sacred knowledge, using paired oil lamps to gauge airflow between shafts, weighted strings to measure angles, shallow pans of water to confirm level. They built in darkness so that cities could rise in sunlight. Everything began with reading the land. Muqannas walked the slopes where mountains met desert, studying patterns invisible to untrained eyes. They observed where wild grasses grew thicker, where certain shrubs clustered, where the earth stayed dark with moisture longer after rain. They watched seasonal streams and noted where water vanished into the ground, tracing its likely path beneath the surface. When they found the right location high on an alluvial fan, they marked the spot for the mother well, the source from which all water would eventually flow. Digging the mother well was the first true test. Workers descended into the earth, excavating a vertical shaft that might reach 10 meters in easy ground or plunge more than 300 meters through stubborn rock before striking the water table. Every bucket of saturated earth had to be hauled upward by rope and windlass, an exhausting rhythm that could continue for months. When water finally seeped into the shaft bottom, the Muqannas knew they had found their source. Now the real work began. From the mother well, master surveyors calculated the precise direction and gradient needed to reach the destination village kilometers away across the plain. They marked the route with surface stakes. Then crews began sinking vertical shafts at intervals of 20 to 50 meters along the entire path. Each shaft became a workspace, and from the bottom of each, 2 tunneling teams dug horizontally toward neighboring shafts, carving through darkness until their passages met. The precision required was extraordinary. The tunnel floor had to drop approximately 1 meter for every 1,000 meters of horizontal distance, a gradient so gentle that the human eye cannot perceive it, yet sufficient to keep water moving eternally forward. A single qanat might require 10 to 20 years of continuous labor. The longest systems took generations, fathers beginning what sons would continue and grandsons would complete. When the final pickaxe stroke broke through to the mother well, water began to flow, and it would not stop for 3,000 years. The moment when water first emerged from the tunnel mouth was sacred. After years of labor, after countless buckets of earth hauled upward through darkness, after lives risked and sometimes lost in the depths, a trickle became a stream, and the stream became a steady flow that caught sunlight for the first time since it had fallen as rain on distant mountains. Villages gathered to witness it. Prayers were offered. Celebrations marked the day, for this was not merely an engineering achievement. It was survival made visible, a guarantee that children would grow and crops would flourish in a land that had offered only dust. Where the water emerged, Persians built careful systems to ensure nothing was wasted. Stone channels carried the flow toward holding reservoirs. Division structures split the water into precisely measured shares allocated to different families and fields according to rights established by custom and law. Every drop had its destination planned before the qanat was even completed. Around these outlet points, the landscape transformed as if touched by magic. Orchards of pomegranate and apricot bloomed where nothing had grown before. Fields of wheat and barley spread across ground that had been barren wasteland within living memory. Villages grew into towns, and towns into cities, all fed by water flowing silently beneath their feet. What made this growth sustainable was the qanats' inherent wisdom. Unlike modern pumps that can drain an aquifer in mere decades, a qanat could only deliver what the underground source naturally provided. It was self-regulating, taking water at the rate nature replenished it, maintaining balance across centuries. Flow increased in spring as mountain snowmelt recharged the aquifer and diminished in late summer as reserves dropped. But it never stopped entirely. Communities learned to read these rhythms, planning their agriculture around patterns as reliable as the seasons themselves. The qanat gave Persia water, but what Persia built with that water would astonish the ancient world. Around 550 BCE, a leader emerged who would transform a collection of highland tribes into the greatest power the ancient world had ever witnessed. Cyrus the Great united the Persian and Median peoples, then launched campaigns of conquest that swept across continents with astonishing speed. Within a single generation, his empire stretched from the shores of Egypt to the mountains of India, from the Aegean Sea, where Greek colonies trembled, to the vast steppes of Central Asia. At its height, more than 40% of the world's entire population lived under Persian rule, an achievement of administration and logistics that would not be matched for centuries. Yet this empire was governed from a heartland that received almost no rain. How was such a thing possible? How could the greatest power on earth maintain its capitals, feed its armies, and project strength across thousands of miles from a plateau that should have been empty desert? The answer lay beneath the ground. Every major Persian capital depended on qanat water for its existence. Pasargadae, the first imperial center built by Cyrus himself, drew life from tunnels reaching back into the Zagros foothills. Susa, the administrative heart where kings received tribute from conquered nations, survived on qanat networks that had operated for centuries before the empire rose. The Achaemenids understood this dependency and made water infrastructure a matter of state policy. Historical records suggest that Cyrus offered tax exemptions to anyone who constructed a new qanat, transforming desert into farmland and expanding the territory capable of supporting population. Even the famous Royal Road, that highway of empire stretching 1,700 miles from Susa to Sardis, depended on qanat-fed way stations that provided water to messengers, soldiers, and horses at regular intervals across otherwise waterless terrain. Foreign visitors marveled at Persia's palaces and treasuries, at the legendary immortals who guarded the king. But the true foundation of Persian power was invisible, silent, and flowing beneath their feet. Persepolis rose from the arid plain like a vision from another world. Begun by Darius the Great around 518 BCE, this ceremonial capital represented the pinnacle of Achaemenid ambition, a complex of palaces and throne halls and treasuries carved from limestone and adorned with gold and silver and lapis lazuli. Delegations from every corner of the empire climbed its monumental staircases to present tribute before the King of Kings, passing through gates guarded by colossal stone bulls and walking halls supported by columns that soared toward the sky. The carvings that decorated every surface depicted the wealth and diversity of nations brought together under Persian rule. Yet Persepolis presented a geographical impossibility. The city sat on an arid plain at the foot of the Zagros Mountains, a location where surface water was seasonal at best and utterly insufficient to support a major urban center. Summer heat baked the surrounding landscape into shades of brown and gold. No river flowed past its walls. No lake shimmered nearby. By every reasonable measure, Persepolis should not have existed at all. Archaeological surveys have revealed the answer hidden beneath the ceremonial splendor. Multiple qanats converge on the site, some stretching more than 40 kilometers back toward mountain aquifers, carrying water through darkness to emerge within the city walls. Underground channels distributed this flow to cisterns and reservoirs throughout the complex. Drainage systems carried waste away with equal efficiency. Ornamental pools reflected the facades of palaces, their still surfaces doubling the grandeur of the architecture above. This was water not merely as necessity, but as symbol. The royal gardens, called pairidaeza in Old Persian, gave the world the very concept of paradise. These were enclosed green spaces irrigated by qanat water, filled with exotic plants and shaded walkways, a deliberate contrast to the brown landscape visible beyond the walls. To make gardens bloom in the desert was to demonstrate mastery over nature itself, evidence of divine favor granted to the Persian king. Persepolis displayed wealth to the world. But the qanat revealed something more profound: Persian mastery over the fundamental challenge of existence. Empire carries ideas across borders as surely as it carries armies. When Persian forces marched into new territories, they brought administrators and tax collectors and soldiers, but they also brought engineers who understood how to make water flow through darkness. And when those empires eventually crumbled, the technology remained, adopted and adapted by successor civilizations who recognized wisdom when they encountered it. Egypt received qanat technology during the Persian occupation that began in 525 BCE under Cambyses II. The western desert oases, isolated pockets of life surrounded by endless sand, became sites of Persian hydraulic engineering. At Karga Oasis, qanats built during this period still function today, carrying water through tunnels excavated more than 2,000 years ago by workers who served a king whose name has been largely forgotten. The technology proved too valuable to abandon when Persian rule ended. Arab conquests beginning in the 7th century CE carried qanat knowledge westward across North Africa. In the Sahara, the systems became known as foggaras, tunnels reaching toward underground water sources that made life possible in one of Earth's most hostile environments. When Muslim armies crossed into Spain, they brought the technology with them. Moorish engineers built extensive qanat networks that irrigated the agriculture of Andalusia for centuries, leaving a legacy that persisted long after the Reconquest returned the peninsula to Christian rule. Eastward, the technology traveled along the Silk Road into Afghanistan and Pakistan, where qanats watered settlements along ancient trade routes. In western China, the karez systems of Xinjiang remain direct descendants of Persian originals, tunnels built using techniques that would be instantly recognizable to a mukanni from 3,000 years ago. Oman developed its own variation called the falaj, adapted to local geology, and now recognized by UNESCO as a World Heritage System. The secret of this successful transfer was simplicity. Qanats require no fuel, no machinery, no external power source. Once built, they function indefinitely with minimal maintenance. Any society possessing groundwater and patience could adopt them. The Persians gave the world a technology that outlasted their empire. But within Persia itself, the qanat would face its greatest tests. The year was 330 BCE, and the greatest conqueror the Western world had ever known stood before the gates of Persepolis. Alexander of Macedon had crossed the Hellespont, shattered Persian armies at Granicus and Issus and Gaugamela, and now he had come to claim the ceremonial heart of the empire he had defeated. What followed was destruction that still echoes through history. Whether in calculated vengeance for the Persian burning of Athens 150 years before, or in a moment of drunken impulse, Alexander ordered the palaces put to the torch. Flames consumed cedar beams brought from Lebanon centuries earlier. Gold melted and ran across marble floors. Records and artwork accumulated across generations vanished in a single night of fire. The Achaemenid dynasty, which had ruled for 2 centuries, ended forever in smoke and ash. Yet beneath the burning palaces, something continued unchanged. What happened to the qanats? The tunnels that fed Persepolis and every other Persian city lay underground, invisible to the conquering army, their shaft openings indistinguishable from countless other features on the arid landscape. More importantly, they were indispensable. Alexander's army needed water. His garrisons would need water. Any administration he installed would need water. Destroying a qanat meant destroying the ability to hold territory, and Alexander intended to rule, not merely ruin. The successor states that followed Alexander's death understood this reality equally well. Lucid governors maintained the systems they inherited. Parthian kings who eventually drove out Greek influence expanded qanat networks into new territories. The technology was simply too valuable to abandon, regardless of which dynasty claimed the throne or which language the court spoke. This pattern would repeat across centuries. Empires rose and fell in blood and fire. Cities were sacked and rebuilt. Populations fled from violence and returned when peace allowed. Through every upheaval, the water kept flowing. The qanat would survive Alexander. It would survive Roman ambitions at the Persian frontier. But its greatest challenge was yet to come. In 224 CE, a new dynasty arose that would restore Persian glory to heights not seen since the age of Darius and Xerxes. The Sasanians overthrew their Parthian predecessors and declared themselves rightful heirs to the Achaemenid legacy, consciously reviving ancient traditions while building something distinctly their own. For over 4 centuries, they would rule an empire stretching from Mesopotamia to the borders of India, and they would invest in infrastructure on a scale that transformed the landscape itself. Sasanian agricultural policy treated qanat construction as a matter of state priority. Royal engineers surveyed new territories and identified locations where underground water could be tapped. The government sponsored construction projects that opened previously uninhabitable zones for settlement, pushing the boundaries of civilization deeper into the desert with each new tunnel completed. Tax incentives encouraged private construction as well, creating a network of water systems that grew denser with each generation. The city of Gonda exemplified what this investment could achieve. Fed by qanat water flowing from distant aquifers, Gonda became one of the ancient world's greatest intellectual centers. Its library preserved texts from Greek, Persian, and Indian traditions. Its medical academy trained physicians, whose knowledge would eventually reach Europe through Arab translations. None of this would have been possible without the water flowing silently beneath its streets. The Sasanians created sophisticated bureaucracies to manage this vital resource. Officials tracked water rights, scheduled maintenance, and resolved disputes between users according to established law. This institutional framework ensured that qanats continued functioning across generations, regardless of individual ownership changes. Engineers combined qanats with dams and canals and water mills, creating integrated irrigation networks of unprecedented complexity. Religion reinforced these practices. Zoroastrianism, the dominant faith of Sasanian Persia, considered water sacred. Polluting or wasting water was not merely foolish, but sinful. Maintaining qanats became a religious duty. The Sasanians built for eternity. They could not imagine what was coming from the Arabian desert. Between 637 and 651 CE, Arab armies carrying the banner of Islam swept across the Iranian plateau with a speed that stunned the ancient world. The Sasanian military, exhausted from decades of warfare against Byzantium, crumbled before this unexpected assault from the south. The last Sasanian king fled eastward and died as a fugitive. Centuries of Zoroastrian tradition gave way to a new faith. Persian became a secondary language in courts where Arabic now dominated. The political and religious transformation was total and irreversible. Yet beneath the ground, the water continued to flow exactly as it had before. The Arab conquerors were desert people who understood the value of water with an intimacy born of scarcity. They had no interest in destroying the infrastructure that made their new territories productive. Instead, they adopted and adapted the systems they found, incorporating Persian water management into the emerging framework of Islamic law. Sharia developed detailed provisions governing water rights, maintenance obligations, and dispute resolution, and much of this legal framework derived directly from pre-existing Persian practice refined over millennia. The Muqani guilds survived because they had to survive. Islamic rulers quickly recognized that qanat specialists possessed irreplaceable knowledge. The craft continued under new masters, protected by necessity and legal tradition that guaranteed water workers their rights and status. When the Abbasid Caliphate founded Baghdad in 762 CE, they built their new capital on a site served by qanat and canal systems, demonstrating that Arab rulers had fully embraced Persian hydraulic wisdom. Islamic scholars went further, documenting qanat construction in technical treatises that preserved knowledge and allowed its transmission to future generations. The 11th century mathematician and engineer Al-Karaji wrote his masterwork on underground water extraction, a text that remains foundational to this day. Persian knowledge, written in Arabic script, became part of a broader Islamic scientific tradition. The Arab conquest destroyed the Persian state. It did not destroy Persian water, but a far more devastating invasion loomed on the horizon. Nothing in Persian history compares to what arrived from the steppes beginning in 1219 CE. The Mongol armies of Genghis Khan and his successors swept across Central Asia and the Middle East with a ferocity that left chroniclers struggling to find words adequate to the horror. This was not conquest in any traditional sense. This was annihilation. Cities that surrendered were sometimes spared. Cities that resisted, and many that did not, faced systematic destruction designed to ensure they would never rise again. The Mongol approach went beyond military victory to something approaching extermination. Populations were massacred in numbers that seem impossible until archaeological evidence confirms the empty cities and mass graves. Buildings were razed to their foundations. But most devastatingly, agricultural infrastructure was targeted with deliberate precision to prevent any possibility of recovery. The conquerors understood that killing people was temporary. Killing the land was permanent. Qanats proved terrifyingly vulnerable. The tunnels themselves lay protected underground, but the vertical shafts that provided access and ventilation stood visible on the surface, marked by their distinctive spoil heaps. Mongol soldiers systematically filled these shafts with rubble and debris, collapsing tunnel sections and cutting off water supplies to cities and fields alike. What had taken generations to build was destroyed in hours. The demographic collapse defies comprehension. Historians estimate that Persia's population fell by 75 to 90% during the Mongol period. Cities that had flourished for millennia became ghost towns, their streets empty, their gardens withered, their qanats choked with stone. Merv had been one of the world's largest cities, fed by extensive qanat and canal networks that supported hundreds of thousands of inhabitants. The Mongols destroyed its irrigation system so thoroughly that the region remains desert today, 8 centuries later. A qanat requires 20 years to build. Destroying one requires only hours. The Mongol invasions set back Persian water infrastructure by centuries. Persia would recover, but some of what the Mongols destroyed would never return. Recovery came slowly, measured not in years but in generations. As Mongol-descended dynasties like the Ilkhanate settled into the responsibilities of ruling rather than raiding, they confronted an unavoidable reality. Empty land produced no taxes. Dead cities generated no tribute. Rulers who wanted wealth and power needed functioning agriculture, and functioning agriculture in Persia required water flowing through rebuilt tunnels. The economics of reconstruction were simple and compelling. A working qanat transformed worthless desert into productive farmland that could be taxed indefinitely. The investment required patience, but the returns lasted centuries. Slowly, tentatively, rebuilding began. The Mukanni guilds had not been entirely destroyed. In communities that survived the initial onslaught, in remote valleys where Mongol armies had not penetrated, the knowledge persisted. Master craftsmen emerged from hiding to train new generations, passing along techniques that had crossed millennia. Shaft by shaft, tunnel by tunnel, the network began to grow again. The true Renaissance came with the Safavid dynasty, which ruled from 1501 to 1736 CE and consciously sought to restore Persian greatness. The Safavids invested heavily in infrastructure alongside their famous achievements in art and architecture. Their capital at Isfahan became one of the world's most beautiful cities, its gardens and mosques and palaces supported by more than 50 qanats, converging from the surrounding highlands. Persian engineers developed remarkable innovations during this period. The yakchal, or ice house, used qanat water and sophisticated evaporative cooling techniques to produce and store ice in the desert. A technological achievement that astonished European visitors who could not comprehend frozen water existing under the blazing summer sun. The Safavids pushed qanat construction into frontier regions, extending habitable territory and securing borders through agricultural settlement. For 3,000 years, the qanat system had adapted to conquest, disaster, and transformation. Its greatest threat would come not from invasion, but from a technology designed to help. The 20th century arrived in Iran carrying promises of modernization and prosperity. Diesel engines and electric motors transformed transportation and manufacturing. But the technology that would most profoundly alter the Persian landscape came in a form that seemed purely beneficial. Motorized pumps capable of extracting groundwater directly from deep aquifers. For the first time in history, Iranians could bypass the patient gravity flow of qanats and pull water upward by mechanical force as much as they wanted, whenever they wanted it. The appeal was immediate and obvious. A qanat required years or decades to construct. A pumped well could be drilled in weeks. A qanat delivered only what the aquifer naturally provided. A pump could extract water on demand, limited only by the power available to run it. Farmers who had planned their crops around seasonal qanat fluctuations could now irrigate year-round. Land that had been marginal could become productive. The boom that followed World War II transformed Iranian agriculture. Tens of thousands of deep wells were drilled across the country. Agricultural production soared to levels never before possible. The population grew as food supplies expanded. For a generation, it seemed that technology had finally conquered the ancient constraint of water scarcity. But the aquifers had limits that the pumps did not respect. Motorized extraction pulled water faster than winter rains, and mountain snowmelt could replenish. Water tables began to fall, first by meters, then by tens of meters, dropping year after year with no sign of stabilization. The consequences for qanats were devastating. A qanat taps water at the natural water table level. When pumps lower that table below the tunnel floor, the qanat runs dry. By the late 20th century, qanats across Iran were failing, their channels empty, their shaft openings abandoned. Of Iran's estimated 37,000 historic qanats, fewer than 20,000 remain functional today. Many of those still working carry drastically reduced flow. The technology that had survived Mongols and empires was dying, killed by progress. The numbers tell a story of catastrophe unfolding in slow motion. Across central Iran, water tables have fallen 50 to 100 meters since the 1960s, dropping further each year as pumps continue extracting what nature cannot replace. Some aquifers that sustained communities for millennia are now effectively exhausted, their ancient reserves consumed in a single human lifetime. The water that accumulated over thousands of years vanished in decades. When underground water disappears, the ground above it collapses. Land subsidence has opened fissures across the Iranian plateau, cracks in the earth that appear without warning, and spread across agricultural fields and through villages. Some of these fissures stretch wide enough to swallow vehicles. Buildings crack and tilt. Roads become impassable. The land itself is sinking as the emptied aquifers compact under the weight of the surface above. Lake Urmia once stood as the largest lake in the Middle East, a vast body of salt water in northwestern Iran that supported unique ecosystems and surrounding agricultural communities. Since the 1990s, the lake has shrunk by 80%, its shores retreating kilometers from former waterlines. The primary cause is upstream water extraction for agriculture, rivers diverted and groundwater pumped before it can reach the lake. As Lake Urmia dries, wind carries salt from the exposed lakebed across the surrounding region, poisoning the very soil that the wells were meant to irrigate. Farmland that once produced crops now grows white with salt deposits. The villages that depended on now dry qanats have been abandoned, their populations migrating to cities in search of survival. Traditional communities dissolving as their water sources failed. Iran has crossed a threshold that hydrologists call peak water. Unlike oil, water is theoretically renewable, but only if extraction does not exceed replenishment. When pumping surpasses recharge, the resource depletes just like any finite reserve. The qanat was not merely old, it was wise, and its wisdom has become newly urgent. In workshops and universities across Iran, a small community of experts watches the decline with growing alarm. They are the remaining muqannas, who learned the craft from their fathers, the hydrologists who study ancient water systems with modern instruments, the government officials who recognize that something irreplaceable is slipping away. They come from different backgrounds and speak with different vocabularies, but they share a common understanding. The knowledge that sustained Persian civilization for 3,000 years is dying with the generation that still remembers it. The traditional expertise at risk goes far beyond simple tunnel digging. Master muqannas carry in their memories the geological quirks of specific regions, the subtle signs that indicate where water flows beneath the surface, the surveying techniques refined across centuries that allowed precise gradients without modern sun. Instruments. Each old craftsman who dies without training a successor takes this knowledge into the grave. The chain of transmission that survived Mongol invasions is breaking in an age of electric pumps and urban migration. Researchers race against time to document what remains. Teams travel to remote villages to record the locations and histories and construction details of functioning qanats before the last people who understand them are gone. They photograph shaft openings and measure tunnel dimensions and interview elderly muqannis whose memories stretch back to when the craft still thrived. Academic hydrologists study qanat systems to understand their sustainable yield, comparing the efficiency of gravity flow against the extraction rates of motorized pumps. Their findings consistently confirm what traditional practice already knew. Qanats take only what nature provides. Pumps take everything until nothing remains. The Iranian government has designated certain qanats as national heritage sites, providing modest funding for maintenance of historically significant systems. But the challenge of reversal remains daunting. Restoring a dry qanat is far more difficult than maintaining a functioning one. Collapsed tunnels must be excavated. Lowered water tables may never recover. Once lost, recovery may be impossible. Some argue the qanat belongs to the past. Others see it as a key to the future. In 2016, the international community formally acknowledged what Persians had known for millennia. The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization inscribed 11 Persian qanats as a collective World Heritage Site, declaring them possessors of outstanding universal value worthy of protection for all humanity. The decision represented global recognition that these tunnels ranked alongside pyramids and cathedrals among humanity's greatest achievements. The criteria for inscription emphasized multiple dimensions of significance. The qanats demonstrated technological innovation that solved fundamental challenges of human survival in arid environments. They shaped human settlement patterns across vast territories, making habitation possible where nature provided no surface water. Most critically, they represented a model of sustainable water management that maintained productivity across 3,000 years without depleting the resource upon which everything depended. The specific sites chosen for inscription included remarkable examples of the craft. The Zarq Qanat near the city of Yazd stretches over 80 kilometers through darkness, possibly the oldest functioning qanat on Earth at 3,000 years of age. The Mahan Qanat system demonstrates sophisticated engineering adapted to challenging terrain. The Ibrahim Abad Qanat showcases the integration of underground channels with surface distribution networks. Each site represents generations of accumulated knowledge and labor. International recognition brought tangible benefits. UNESCO status attracted scholarly attention, tourism revenue, and preservation pressure that might otherwise have been absent. Suddenly, these ancient tunnels appeared in travel guides and academic journals and international media. The world was watching, and that attention created incentive for protection. Yet heritage designation has inherent limitations. Protecting 11 specific qanats does nothing to address the systemic aquifer depletion threatening all qanats everywhere. Similar water heritage sites have gained recognition worldwide, from the Omani Aflaj to the Spanish Acequias, reflecting growing global interest in traditional water systems. Recognition was a beginning, but survival would require something more. A movement is growing across Iran, still small but gaining strength with each passing year. Environmentalists and engineers, traditionalists and government officials, academics and rural community leaders are finding common cause in an argument that would have seemed absurd a generation ago. The qanat, that ancient technology dismissed as obsolete, may hold answers to challenges that modern solutions have only worsened. The core argument is straightforward and increasingly difficult to dismiss. Qanats extract water sustainably. Pumps do not. In a future defined by water scarcity and climate uncertainty, sustainable extraction is not nostalgia or romanticism. It is survival. The mathematics are unforgiving. Aquifers that took millennia to fill are being emptied in decades. When they are gone, no technology will bring them back. But qanats take only what nature replenishes, maintaining balance indefinitely. Restoration projects have begun in several regions, efforts to rehabilitate qanats that fell dry when pumping lowered water tables. Teams clear collapsed tunnel sections and reinforce vulnerable areas where centuries of use have weakened walls. In some locations where pumping restrictions have allowed partial aquifer recovery, dry qanats have begun flowing again, proof that restoration is possible when conditions permit. Even more remarkably, new qanats are being built. Engineers design systems using traditional principles enhanced by modern surveying technology, GPS, and laser levels guiding work that once relied entirely on oil lamps and weighted strings. The results demonstrate that ancient wisdom and contemporary tools can combine effectively. The economic argument grows stronger as energy costs rise. A qanat requires no electricity or fuel to operate, no ongoing expenditure once construction is complete. In an era of uncertain power supplies and climbing prices, passive gravity flow represents an advantage that motorized pumps cannot match. Pilot programs supported by government agencies and international organizations now provide technical assistance and modest funding to communities willing to maintain their qanat heritage. The question is no longer whether qanats can survive. It is whether humans are wise enough to let them. Climate projections for Iran paint a portrait of intensifying difficulty. Temperatures are rising across the plateau, increasing evaporation from surface water and straining already stressed ecosystems. Precipitation is declining in many regions, with snowpack in the mountains diminishing year after year. Droughts that once struck occasionally are becoming more frequent and more severe. The conditions that made qanats necessary 3,000 years ago are growing worse, not better. Modern water infrastructure faces profound vulnerabilities in this changing climate. Electric pumps require reliable power supplies, and power systems face their own climate stresses as demand for cooling rises and hydroelectric capacity shrinks with reduced river flows. Dams require rivers with consistent volume, but those rivers depend on snowmelt and rainfall patterns that are shifting unpredictably. Desalination offers an alternative for coastal regions, but requires enormous energy inputs and provides no solution for interior populations. Every modern approach carries climate sensitivities that threaten reliability precisely when reliability matters most. The qanat stands in stark contrast. It requires no electricity, no fuel, no mechanical maintenance. It functions regardless of power outages or price spikes or supply chain disruptions. As long as mountain snow continues to fall and melt and recharge the aquifers, water flows through darkness toward the communities that need it. This resilience is not coincidental, but inherent in the design. A technology built to work with natural systems rather than overpower them. Climate adaptation specialists increasingly speak of nature-based solutions, approaches that harness ecological processes instead of fighting them. Qanats exemplify this philosophy in built form. Ancient answers to questions the modern world is only beginning to ask. The principles translate beyond Iran to any arid region with mountainous aquifer sources. North Africa, Central Asia, the American Southwest, and parts of Australia could potentially adapt qanat concepts to local conditions. Scholars worldwide now study these tunnels not as historical curiosities, but as models for survival. The ancient Persians solved a problem the modern world is only beginning to face. The shaft opening appears as a simple circle in the earth, its stone edges worn smooth by centuries of hands gripping them during descent. Near the ancient city of Yazd, where qanat culture runs deepest, such openings dot the landscape like portals to another world. The first step onto the worn ladder, or the footholds carved into the shaft wall, marks the beginning of a journey backward through time. With each meter of descent, the temperature drops, and the circle of daylight above shrinks until it becomes a distant, bright coin against growing darkness. At the bottom, the senses recalibrate to an alien environment. Darkness here is absolute, untouched by sun since the tunnel was carved. The sound of running water echoes off stone walls, a gentle murmur that has continued unbroken for millennia. The smell of damp earth fills the nostrils, clean and ancient, the scent of water moving through darkness. Cool air washes over the skin, maintaining a constant temperature year-round, regardless of whether summer heat or winter cold grips the surface above. The tunnel itself bears witness to its makers. Dimensions remain remarkably consistent, roughly 80 centimeters wide and 150 centimeters tall, precisely what a crouching man needs to swing a pick. Tool marks from iron implements used centuries or millennia ago remain visible on the walls, the signature of anonymous craftsmen whose names have vanished, but whose work endures. The floor has been worn smooth by 3,000 years of flowing water, polished by the patient passage of countless molecules traveling from mountain to city. The water itself flows clear and cold, emerging from darkness upstream and vanishing into darkness downstream, a continuous ribbon of life that has never stopped. Standing in this tunnel, the weight of time becomes almost physical. This passage was dug by hand, in absolute darkness, by men who never saw the full result of their labor. Above ground, empires have risen and fallen. Religions have transformed. Languages have changed beyond recognition. Below ground, the water flows on. The qanat is more than infrastructure. It is identity made manifest in stone and water, a technology so central to Persian civilization that its influence permeates language and law and social organization and worldview. Persian vocabulary contains dozens of words related to qanat, water rights, and distribution, subtle distinctions that centuries of careful management. Legal traditions governing water use shaped broader concepts of property and obligation. Communities organized themselves around the rhythms of qanat flow, their calendars and ceremonies tied to the water that sustained them. The ethical dimension runs deeper still. The qanat embodies a relationship with nature based fundamentally on limits, an acceptance that the earth provides what it provides, and no more. Builders took only what aquifers could replenish. They constructed for generations not yet born, investing decades of labor in systems their grandchildren would inherit. This was not primitive inability to extract more. It was wisdom choosing restraint. Modern extraction philosophy operates from opposite assumptions. Resources exist to be exploited at maximum speed. Technology will always find more when current supplies diminish. The future can take care of itself. This worldview has delivered unprecedented material abundance for some, but it has also delivered depleted aquifers and dying lakes and land that sinks as the water beneath it vanishes. The wisdom embedded in qanat design offers an alternative vision: patience rather than haste, precision rather than brute force, intergenerational thinking rather than quarterly returns, respect for natural systems rather than domination over them. These qualities grow increasingly rare in modern practice and increasingly necessary for long-term survival. The concept of slow infrastructure captures something essential. Built over decades, functioning for millennia, requiring minimal intervention once complete. The opposite of planned obsolescence and disposable technology, the qanat matters beyond its water because it proves something vital. Humans can build systems that sustain rather than deplete. We have done it before. The question is not whether ancient technology is relevant. The question is whether we are wise enough to learn from it. Iran stands at a crossroads that will determine whether its civilization continues or collapses. One path leads through continued aquifer depletion toward agricultural failure and mass displacement, a future where the mistakes of recent decades compound until the land can no longer support its population. The other path requires a fundamental shift toward sustainable water management, a return to principles that sustained Persian civilization for 3 millennia before the age of pumps. The qanat cannot replace all modern water infrastructure, nor should it try. Cities of millions require water volumes that gravity tunnels alone cannot provide. Industry and agriculture at contemporary scales need sources beyond what traditional systems deliver. But qanats can supplement modern infrastructure in ways that matter profoundly. They can reduce demand on overstressed aquifers. They can provide baseline supply during power outages or fuel shortages. They can demonstrate that sustainability is possible. Integration offers the best of both worlds. Modern surveying technology using GPS and laser instruments can guide tunnel alignment with precision that ancient muqannas achieved only through generations of accumulated skill. Sensors can monitor flow rates and structural integrity remotely. New construction techniques can reinforce vulnerable sections. Traditional principles need not mean primitive methods. Policy changes must accompany technical efforts. Legal frameworks protecting qanat water rights need strengthening against encroachment by wells that lower water tables. Investment in muqanni training programs can ensure the craft survives another generation. Restrictions on pumping near-functioning qanats can give ancient systems room to operate. Beyond Iran, pilot projects in Morocco and Afghanistan and Spain explore whether qanat principles can address water challenges in other arid regions. Building a qanat is fundamentally an act of faith in the future. It requires believing that generations will follow, that the future matters, that it is worth investing decades of labor in something you may never see completed. The Persians looked at a desert and saw an empire. We look at their tunnels and see a choice. From high, above, the Iranian plateau spreads beneath the sky, as it has for millennia, brown and cracked and seemingly lifeless under the relentless sun. But look closer at those satellite images, and patterns emerge from the emptiness. Dotted lines stretch across the desert, chains of circular shadows marking vertical shafts that descend into darkness. These are the surface traces of invisible rivers, water flowing through tunnels carved by human hands in an age before memory. Near Yazd, a qanat has flowed continuously for 3,000 years. The water emerging from its mouth today fell as snow on distant mountains when the Achaemenid kings still ruled. It flowed when Alexander burned Persepolis and when Arab armies brought a new faith. It continued through the Mongol catastrophe that nearly extinguished Persian civilization. It persisted as modernity arrived, with its engines and pumps and promises. Through every transformation the surface world endured, this water never stopped. The qanat represents something essential about humanity. It embodies ingenuity in the face of impossible conditions, the refusal to accept that the desert would win, the audacity to dig into darkness seeking life. Every city that grew on the Persian plateau, every crop that fed a family through winter, every empire that projected power across continents was built on water flowing unseen beneath the ground. Billions of lives across 3,000 years sustained by tunnels dug with iron picks by men whose names we will never know. The ancients built for us. They invested decades of labor in systems they knew their grandchildren would inherit. They thought in centuries rather than quarters. They accepted limits and worked within them. What are we building for those who come after? Persia controlled fire, conquered nations, built palaces that awed the ancient world. But its greatest achievement was invisible, silent, and essential. Deep underground, in absolute darkness, the water continues to flow as it has for 3,000 years, as it will for 3,000 more if we are wise enough to let it. Some technologies are measured by their power, others by their endurance. The qanat has endured. The question is whether we